Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bazaar Over Explained. I'm the Bazaar Whisperer, and I'm so excited to be talking to you guys today about the Pygmalion builds and how to play them. In this video, we're going to be going over 8 different builds for Pygmalion and basically talking to you about what items you should be looking for, what skills you should be looking for, as well as what monsters you want to be defeating, and then lastly, giving you kind of a play-by-play or a game plan for how to assemble these builds. So you have 8 to go through here today, starting with the value stack build. Value stacking, love it, hate it. It's part of the Bazaar. It's core to Pygmalion's game plan. He has so many items that facilitate getting bigger and bigger and bigger items. And if you want to be playing Pygmalion at its most optimal, you have to be able to value stack. So what's our game plan with value stacking, and what does value stacking even mean? Well, first, we're getting as much income as possible. So every time we have the opportunity to gain more income, either by clicking a button that just says gain income, or getting items that give us income, or finding ways to get value, we are trying to get as much money as possible. And then we're converting that money into value stacking our items. So we are literally increasing the value of our items that we're playing with. We'll see this on different items, maybe like a fixer-upper or a kiosk. There's many to do this with. And one big thing about this build is you're all in from the beginning. Don't be afraid to lose early. A lot of what we're going to be doing with this build is we're putting a lot of value into our properties early and as often as we can, so that we can basically transition into a late game build as fast as possible. Where other builds might have on day 6 or 7 their powerful items, or doing progressive damage, and they're a little more synergy focused, or we see like a Vanessa who's going up with a complete board of weapons. What we're trying to do is get one big item that's going to be way more powerful than any combination of items that our opponents can assemble. But along the way, we also want to try and assemble a functional board. It's really important that you're able to defeat these monsters, because we are going to want to get to level 10 ASAP. If we can defeat monsters, get the maximum amount of XP, we can also get some good skills that are going to synergize with our builds. We're going to get the money that we need to be able to value stack our items, and ultimately we're going to be able to accelerate our build to the point where we don't just lose before we're able to get our build online. And that means that we're probably value stacking the backpack. This means that we have our functional board in play. It's something that we're not intending on utilizing for the majority of the run, but it's just something to kind of bridge that gap. But in our backpack is where we're doing a lot of that value stacking work. But first things first, what items are we going to be looking at when value stacking? Well, we're going to want something like a ledger, because this will allow us to put more money in our items, just the same with a rewards card and a stained glass window. Also, something like a pitchfork is going to give us truffles to increase the value of our properties. We're also looking for that key item to value stack. So a great one that we commonly see is a fixer-upper. One very powerful one that you see later in the game is subscraper. We see something that is super potent in many builds, and especially with the recent buffs to it, this kiosk, it can do an crazy amount of burn if you're value stacking it. And even if you don't have an enchantment or you don't have a kiosk, we can convert all the damage and all the shielding that we're creating, something like a fixer-upper, through the spiky shield. Let's take a look at these items here. So I've pulled up the ledger here for us to see on howbazaar.gg, a wonderful website and resource for anyone who's starting out in the Bazaar, or anyone who's very seasoned and experienced in the Bazaar. This website should be open beside you every time you're playing, in my opinion. But regardless, the ledger. So we can see that it says when you sell 10 items, adjacent items gain value. So again, we're going to be utilizing this to value stack our items. We're going to go and try and leverage things like getting chocolates for free, or getting gumballs for very cheap, to get a lot of value stacks onto the items that are adjacent to this ledger when it goes off. This is going to be tricky. It's going to require a lot of backpack management, but it's kind of the name of the game on Pygmalion. You're also going to be looking out for this rewards card. So this is going to give you more value as you progress through the day. And then we can also look at, again, pitchfork can do something very similar. It's going to also give you a truffle, which can increase the value of an item when you sell it. And based off what level the pitchfork is at, that is the level or tier of truffle that you're going to get alongside it. So if you have a gold pitchfork, you're going to get gold truffles. Something good to know there. But again, what are we value stacking? Well, we can go ahead and look at something like the fixer-upper, which is something that we see pretty early in our runs here. We can see it as early as a bronze tier, so it can pop up even on day one. And this is your bread and butter fixer-upper, or bread and butter value stacking item. The main thing about this is that you can get it at bronze. You never have to buy an upgrade for the fixer-upper. It is naturally going to upgrade with every 50 gold that you spend, and you really don't need to invest anything more than the 6 gold that you did to purchase this from the beginning. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The earlier you get it, the better it's going to be because you have more opportunity and more time to put value on the item. But what makes this item so powerful is the enchantments that go alongside it. So really the name of the game here, as we talked about, is getting to your enchantment, getting to your level 10 as fast as possible so that you can ideally put something like fiery, toxic, obsidian, or shielded on to your fixer-upper. You're not always going to have that option though. So if you don't have that option, what do? Well, that's where the spiky shield comes in. This says it deals damage equal to your shield. Thus, you have the fixer-upper. It's going off pretty consistently. It's pretty big. It's giving you a lot of shield. You're converting that shield directly into damage. You can also do this with something like force field, but this item is not innate to Pygmalien. It does the similar thing where it deals damage equal to your shield, but just again know that you can get this, but it's not likely that you're going to get this in every run. But talking about other items that we can value stack, well, here's the subscraper. This one is very potent because it says at the start of each fight, your other items gain value equal to this item's value for the fight. So essentially, you're turning all the item on your subscraper into value across your entire board. And the subscraper can do a lot of damage overall with one of its enchantments, but you could pair it with something like skyscraper, which says deal damage equal to 3 times the value of your items for that fight and has double value in combat. So if you have 5 or fewer items in play, which if you're playing a value stacking build is very likely, it's going to have +1 multicast. So this item alone is pretty good, but if you can value stack the subscraper or again the fixer-upper alongside of it, that's where this item is going to do a lot of damage. You can certainly value stack this item. The problem is that it is only available at diamond tier, so you're not going to see this one until much later into the game, so just keep that in mind. And then one that is also very potent that you can get very early on into the game at bronze tier here is the Kiwas, or the luxury Kiwas. This has a cooldown of 7 seconds. It says burn equal to this item's value. Notably, it is not a property. So for the items that are going to be giving value to your property specifically, like a stained glass window, this does not work with that. But it has this very potent effect here where it says when you sell a property, this gains some level of value. So you can value stack this Kiwas in other ways, but it has this innate built-in property where if you are buying and selling the property type items, it's going to gain burn. So you don't necessarily need a value stack item like a ledger, like a rewards card. You can just get this Kiwas and then start buying and selling properties. And if you can enchant this thing, it can go pretty crazy. But now that we've looked at items, let's look at skills. So with a lot of these skills, what we're going to be looking for is either giving more value to our items, giving more crit chance to our items, or lowering our items' cooldown. So we can see something like Industrialist, Minimalist, Long Strides, all cooldown reduction, Master Salesman's giving a tremendous amount of value, along with Clean Storefront, and we have like Big Numbers and Prime Real Estate for crit chance. And quickly taking a look at those skills, we can see Industrialist here. It's a gold tier skill. You get 10 or 15% cooldown reduction, which is very important. You have Long Strides, which is if you have 5 or fewer items, you get this amount of cooldown reduction, so even further. And then if you were able to enchant your item without having to play a spiky shield, you can get Minimalist, which says if you have no weapons, you reduce your item's cooldowns by 10 and 20%. So pretty big game there. And one of the most important skills that you can get is Master Salesman. I say it's important, you don't need it in every run, but if you get this, you're going to be going over the top very quickly of your opponents because your items have double value during combat. If you think about if a lot of Pygmalions are going to be value stacking into the late game, that's one of the best Pygmalion builds for the ultra late game. So if you know you're going to be fighting on day 15, 16, the way that you can go over the top of other Pygmalions is just simply having bigger numbers in them. So you can double the value of your items during combat, and if they don't have this skill, well, chances are you're going to be doing double the damage that they are. But speaking of big numbers, we can look at the big number skill, which says your large items have 25 or 50% crit chance. For one skill to give you 50% crit chance, that's insane. There are no other skills in the game that are going to get you this close unless they're scaling skills. So one skill that can give you 50% crit chance is just an absurd ratio. And the thing about this is that you can get this all from one monster. So let's talk about them. So I want to take a look at three important monsters to know about when you're playing Pygmalion and you're value stacking. And we can again go to this monsters tab here on How Bazaar, and we can sort by the different days. We can look through each day to see what monsters are available. And the one that I want to start with is Sergeant Suds. So Sergeant Suds has this clean storefront skill, which says your leftmost item has plus 15 value during combat. So that's pretty nice in their own right. They also have a hogwash, which is not super important for this build, but it is a property if you are getting something like a Kiowas and you're trying to value stack that item. Another really important monster here on day 8 is going to the Cosmic Rock. The reason being is that they have feathers, and cooldown reduction is super, super impactful on Pygmalion. On the Cosmic Rock day, on this day 8, you may be tempted to fight one of these other monsters, or maybe fighting the dragon to get like a burn item for your board, and that's certainly good too. But if you are maybe looking at the Bouncertron or looking at Dr. Vortex, then I would consider going to the Cosmic Rock. You could also go to Car Conductor too, because they have this Captain's Wheel at gold, which is very good. But in general, I think the cooldown reduction, static ability of reducing your item's cooldown by 6% is going to be pretty good for you. Getting Keen Eye, again, with more crit chance is very good for you as well. But that's more two smaller monsters to consider. The really important one here is actually going to be on day 10, and that is the Property Baron. The interesting thing about the Property Baron is because we're going for a late game build, we're probably going to see the Property Baron more than once. There's only 2 monsters at this tier that we can see in the Bazaar at day 10. So in that middle section, it's either going to be Trash Titan or Property Baron. And again, if we're winning on maybe day 15 or 16, we're going to get 5 to 6 chances to look at this slot here. And the Property Baron has very important skills for us and important items too. So we looked at that Master Salesman skill. Your items have double value during combat. You can only get this skill through the Property Baron, I believe. I'm unsure if there's another way. Maybe you could get it through Nufu, I guess. I don't think that's the case, but I believe the only way is really through this Property Baron, at least consistently. They also have big numbers, which is again that crit chance skill. It comes to you at diamond if you get it. You don't have to upgrade it, which is huge. They have Trader, which you're giving +2 value to your items. It's not nothing. But lastly, they also have Skyscraper and Subscraper. Both of these items for this build are insane. Skyscraper can basically turn your 0 damage, maybe only survivability focused Pygmalion value stack build into a damage dealer just by one item. Subscraper also healing, and for the amount of value that you have of items on your board can be huge. Billboard is good too, but it takes some work putting into it to really get it up and going. And then Keychain, it can be a nice little addition to your board if you need one slot just to put the cooldown or just to put another use of your property on board. Notably that it has a 12 or 9-second cooldown, and that is a very, very long time. So it's more a backup plan, if anything. I wouldn't really rely on this going off. Ideally, when you enchant your value stacked item, you're ending the game before you get to this 12-second mark. So that's in an ideal scenario, but these are the monsters we are looking for. So putting all of that information into practice here, I've pulled this from the Bazaar Discord, a user that got 10 wins here. You can see their name up there, of a value stack build. They value stacked this fixer-upper, and it looks like they have the shiny property to it, I want to say. I don't believe that's shielding. Actually, I guess that would be the shielded property, so it's getting double the amount of shielding. They have a phonograph next to it, which means that its cooldown is being reduced by 50%. They are also hasting their items when they use a property. They have that keychain to get this going off. They value stacked it with this VIP pass, which is another value stacking item that you can utilize to work with your properties. And then their damage dealer here is the spiky shield. So again, they're creating just a ton of defensive shielding, and they convert that into damage using the spiky shield. Giving you another example here of, I believe this user is xClen, this value stack build that they have a pretty big subscraper that also has a shielding property to it, but they've also have this Kiowas here that has a shielding property to it. So the Kiowas is doing 662 burn. That's an obscene amount of burn damage. They're also doubling, as we see with this Master Salesman, they're doubling the value of their items during combat. And then they have the stained glass window, which says that when you win a fight with this item, you are giving value to your properties, and it's also reducing the cooldowns of their items, as well as with this phonograph, as we talked about, that's reducing the item of this Kiowas, or the cooldown of this Kiowas by 50%. So this very potent build. And additionally, you're just healing and shielding for so much with the subscriber. You're putting on so much damage. It's going off at a very low cooldown. This is like your ultra late game pig, and this is kind of like the bread and butter of what you want to do with Pygmalien. Don't worry about the early game. Just guarantee that you can get to the 10 wins in the late game. Okay, next up here is the square build. The square build, it's an interesting one. It's in this kind of strange place right now. I would say that it can be potent, but it's not always going to be potent. You have to do it correctly for it to work well. And let's take a look at what correct looks like. Now everyone's going to do it differently. So, okay, correct is subject to interpretation. But the way that I do it and have had success with it is, first, I prioritize income. Again, this is getting either straight income through having more, or clicking the gain income buttons that you're going to see throughout the bazaar, or it's having items that are going to be generating value for you. You want a lot of money if you're going to be going into the square build. And then once you're establishing that income or things you want to be doing alongside establishing that income, you're going to want to value stack a weapon to at least silver, and you're going to want to get a weapon rather, and you're going to want to upgrade it to silver before you start stacking. So with this, you are basically going to see something like a regal blade, you're going to see a dog, whatever it might be. You're going to want to be making sure that you're getting every ounce of value stack, or damage stack in this case, that you can on that item. And alongside it, you're going to be wanting to pick up economy items. You're going to want to get your rewards card. You're still going to want to get your ledger. This is going to allow you to buy and sell all the different items, whether it be weapons or small items, for your different value stacking or damage stacking items. So these are pretty important just to make sure that you have the money to do that. And you're going to prioritize value stacking plays. So if you're wanting, again, with a regal blade, as we'll see in a second, to go to weapon shops, you're going to want to ensure that you're gaining as many opportunities as you can to put that damage onto your damage item. And we'll see what that looks like in a second. And the last one here, don't be afraid to pivot off this build. The square build is strong generally, but there are certainly times when it is going to be worse, and it is going to be significantly worse than if you were to go into a different build, because of the amount of stats that you need to put onto your board. So if you don't have the income, if you aren't seeing the right items, it's totally cool. Just go into a different build, pivot off of it. If it's not coming together and you see something more powerful, get out of it. It's not a big deal. You don't have to be all in on it. So square. This is why it is called the square build. We are getting items that are all of this medium type, and we are filling our board with them. So the one that I was talking primarily about there was Regal Blade. we'll see that this is a big damage stacking item that we can utilize. But the crux of your medium might build, or the crook of it, as it were, is the crook. The crook says it is going to give damage to all of your medium items based off the amount of medium items you have in play. So this incentivizes you to put as many medium items as you can onto the board. And the Atlatl is one of them that you're definitely going to want to be looking for, because it in its own right can do an obscene amount of damage just because of how fast it goes off of. It synergizes also very well with the crook, as well as the flail. It has 3 times multicast, which with the crook, you're going to be doing a lot of damage. One interesting one here is the Lion Cane. This item is going to be dealing damage equal to your max HP, so it can allow you to transition to a max HP build potentially, but it itself can do a lot of damage. Additionally, caltrops are just kind of a broken item. I say broken not in the sense that it breaks the game, but it's so incredibly powerful and so incredibly potent against a lot of the builds. Basically, if you're not up against like a slow one weapon build or just a slow build in general, which right now predominantly in the meta are a lot of builds that are going off very quickly with a lot of different smaller items, caltrops are just going to burst your opponent down. You need obviously to put some damage onto it, but if you can do that, you can be out damaging your opponents pretty significantly and pretty frequently. 2 other ones to look out for in terms of items are Cash Cannon and the Pygmalien longbow, not the Janalian. The Cash Cannon specifically says that it's going to increase damage equal to its value, or to the value that you generate. So you get 5 gold, it's going to gain 5 value, and it's going to do more damage. With that, I think it's actually just the damage, not the value. But it can be your kind of one weapon item that could replace a Regal Blade. And I say that because it is something that you can get pretty early, and it can generate just a ton of damage that you put onto this just through like the value stacking plays that you can do, or the economy plays, especially if you can upgrade this early. And then the Pygmalien longbow. This item is not one that you're going to want to have on your board for the majority of the game, but when you're at the start of the game, this item alone can carry you completely. So one that you're probably going to have on your board early and then transition out of later. So let's look at these items a little more in depth. So that Regal Blade, as we talked about, it says when you sell a weapon, this gains 10, 20, 30, or 40 damage based off its tier. I highly, highly, highly recommend that when you get a Regal Blade, you do not start selling your weapons until you get it to at least silver. The reason being is that gaining this 10 damage, you're going to be investing a lot of gold just to get this 10 damage on to the Regal Blade, and you can effectively double that if you just wait. And there are a lot of opportunities to gain Regal Blades. It is bronze, it's going to be in your medium item shops, your weapon shops. You're also going to have the opportunity to see B1, B2 pretty early, or just your guaranteed level up item upgrades that you get through your level ups. Your Regal Blade, you can be patient with it, and this will allow you to be rewarded into the mid game. One thing that you don't want to do with your Regal Blade is spend all this money, have no economy, no income, and then be maybe putting 20 to 30 damage on it per day. It's not going to be enough. It's not going to put on nearly enough damage to make this item worthwhile. It has a 7-second cooldown inherently, and one of the downsides of this square build with Pygmalien is you don't have a lot of HP. And one thing that we'll talk about in the skill section is you need to make up for that. But because you have not a lot of HP, you don't have a lot of defenses, you really need to be killing your opponent very quickly. Because in 14 seconds, this is going to have gone off twice. So ultimately what you're going to want to do is have most of your square build items go off, and when they go off, they one-shot your opponent or get very close to that, because you're probably not going to be living much longer than that. But again, let's look at more of these items here. So the crook, we can see that it's going to give our medium weapons damage based off of each medium weapon we have. So if we have 5 medium weapons on board, we are going to be gaining 40 damage across the board if we have this at silver and things of this nature. So crook, very strong, and it is basically the focal point of your build when you're going for a medium item build. It is going to enable you to actually play your Atlatl. It's going to enable you to actually play your Caltrops and things of this nature, because as we'll see with something like Caltrops, it starts with 1 damage or 10 damage. That's not nearly enough. When an enemy uses an item, we deal 1 damage in return. Not good enough for us. We need to have more damage onto it. Same with something like the Atlatl. Here we are. The Atlatl. It has an 11-second cooldown, but its cooldown is reduced by 1% for every 2 damage it has. So you can put damage onto this. You can upgrade it to give it more damage. You can get something like left-handed or right-handed for this to go off quicker. Those are damage buff skills. But really that crook is going to give you a huge damage boost onto the Atlatl and allow this item to be playable. Otherwise, a damage item going off every 11 seconds simply is not going to be good enough. And quickly taking a look at Flail here, the big importance of this item is that it has a 3 times multicast. It again has that 7-second cooldown, so it is a bit slow, but if you have something like a crook, this is going to do a lot of damage. And then again, Cash Cannon here says when you gain gold, this item gains damage equal to 1, 2, or 3 times the amount of gold gained. Ideally, you're going to want to get this to gold very quickly, but you got to do what you got to do. This is a viable source of 1 item dealing that kind of one-shot damage that you might need for this build, but it's generally not favored over something like the Regal Blade, and that's because the Regal Blade can also synergize with something like Pig's Gym. Pig's Gym here, it's a property, and you don't have to play this on your board, but it's good to still be value stacking it regardless. Either way, it has a 6-second cooldown. It says your weapons gain damage equal to this item's value for the fight, but it has a very similar clause to the Regal Blade. It says when you buy a weapon, this gains increased value and you get max health for the fight. So this is doing something very important for you. It's giving you survivability, which you absolutely will want to have when you're going for this square build. With Pygmalion, you have a lot of great defensive options, but your offensive options generally are not going to be faster than your opponent. Your opponent is probably going to be on like a weapon spam build, or if they're dually, they're on some build that's scaling damage very quickly. If they're Mac, they're scaling fire damage or poison on you very quickly. You won't be able to keep up if you don't one-shot your opponent after that 7-second mark. So Pig's Gym can help kind of bridge that gap, give you more max health, to allow you to potentially do the rest of the damage you would need to do at that 14-second mark when your items go off again. So keep a lookout for this one. It's also one that can allow you to pivot off of the square build if you need to. So let's look at the skills for the square build here. So we have heavy firepower. It's going to be damage for your board. Lifting, this is going to be another damage skill. You're going to see a common theme here. Power Broker, it's going to give you more damage. Strength, more damage. The right or left-handed skill, all more damage. So you want damage, damage, damage. That's the name of the game here. Arms Dealer is going to give you some max HP, as well as some backroom dealings. These two are synergized very, very well together, because this says that you want to go to merchants to gain HP. Arms Dealer says that you want to buy weapons to gain HP. So you're going to go to your weapons merchant, you're going to buy a weapon, gain a lot of HP that way. But a very potent and powerful one that's easy to enable is Brawler, which basically says you are going to get HP for the amount of items that you have, or the weapons you have on your board. And we can look at that more in depth here. So it starts at silver tier and says you get 100, 200, 300 max health for each weapon that you have. Notably, you're not going to be filling your weapon completely, or your board completely with weapons, so you're not going to have 10 weapons, but you have 5, and thus you'll have 500, 1,000, or 1,500 max health, which basically at each respective point in the game which you could get this skill is going to be a lot. I am a player who really likes to buy chocolates, and I'll spend that 10 gold on those chocolates and get 150 health many times that I see it, even if it means I'm losing my economy and all the money that I had in the bank, just because when you're in the early game, that 150 health matters so much. So you can only imagine what 100 or 500 health would do comparatively. So one to be looking out for there. And then we can look at that backroom dealings, which says when you visit a merchant, you permanently gain max health. So this can be pretty potent because you're going to be wanting to going to your merchants so you can buy and sell items to stack your Regal Blade or stack your gem or your cash cannon. And that's going to all synergize very well with the Arms Dealer. It says when you buy a weapon, permanently gain max health based off of its tier. So just ways to be going and maximizing off of these max health opportunities, or maximizing off the merchants that you go to get max health. And other than that, one that is really important that we first looked at is this heavy firepower skill. It says if you have 5 or fewer items in play, your weapons have 25, 50, 75 damage based on this item's tier. So this one works perfectly with your 5 weapon square build, and it is one of the skills that's going to put the most amount of damage onto your board for the least amount of effort. And just in generally, when we think about skills, it's going to have one of the highest rates of return on basically the gold that you'd use to buy it, or just on skills in general for the amount of damage it's giving you. Let me pull up strength, which is a common damage skill, for instance. So strength says your weapons gain 15, 10, 15, 20, or 25 damage. At diamond tier skill, this is giving you 25 damage. But at heavy firepower, we saw here that at its lowest tier, it's giving you 25. So just to put that in comparison, it would be putting, 50 more damage onto each one of your items at diamond. That's a huge jump in damage. So you definitely want to be looking out for that. I also talked about Power Broker, which says your weapons have plus damage equal to your income. This is a pretty strong skill just because on Pygmalien, you want to get as many of these income opportunities as you can. With most of the builds, you're generally going to want money on Pygmalien, so you're going to be increasing your income. And if you can get this to diamond tier, you can turn your 14 income into 28 damage on your board. So just thinking about that sort of use case, you basically are turning your gold investment directly into damage, which is pretty nice. And every point of damage that you can get onto your board, again, when we're thinking about it, Lotl and Caltrops is very important. Notably, there's also similar skills to Power Broker that do very similar things. I think there's one that is directly an analog, which says that you gain damage equal to your income on your items. That's a Pygmalion skill. There's ones that give damage to your items based off the value that they have. Additionally, things like that. So really, again, damage and max health are what you're going to be looking for. So we've looked at these skills, but where are we going to be getting them when we're looking at our monsters? So there are a couple different ones that we can look at. We can look at something like a Rogue Scrapper, which is not the most important one, but day 2 you can get a Junkyard Club, which is pretty nice. We can also scroll down here and see something like an Eccentric Aetheryte could have the Rig skill for us, which would haste our items. But the bigger ones that we're going to be wanting to go to are things like the Outland Dervish. The Outland Dervish has weapons and crit chance that we can pick up, but notably they also have cooldown reduction with the Clockwork Blades. 2% will go a long way. It may not look like a lot, but again, cooldown reduction is huge on Pygmalion. And further into the days here, we can go to Trash Town Mayor. If we can get this augmented weaponry skill, which says your weapons have +1 damage when you sell a small item, or when you sell a small item, rather, you increase this bonus by 1 or 2, you can stack up a tremendous amount of damage just through this skill alone. This skill can take the place of all the strength and all the heaven weaponry that you have, because you're doing something what you want to do with something like a dog, where you are purchasing chocolates or purchasing gumballs, and then you're scaling your dog, but you're also super scaling it because you have this augmented weaponry skill, putting even more damage onto this item. Another one to look out for here is the Zookeeper. The Zookeeper has a crook. This is very good for you. If you're playing the square build, it's not necessary that you have a crook, but man, is it going to help you. So they naturally have a crook that you can get. If you already have a crook, and maybe it's gold or something of that nature at day 6, you can go to the Loan Shark. And the Loan Shark has the Power Broker skill that we talked about. They also have ATM, which is kind of nice, just gaining more income for you. And notably, they also have the Cash Cannon at gold tier. So if you haven't really found an item to be putting a lot of damage onto, the Cash Cannon could be that item for you. Other than that, the Cosmic Rock is always pretty good, but the Thug, if you're a weapons build, basically on any character, you want to go to the thug. The thug is super important in that it has the bonk skill. It says enemy cooldowns are increased by 1 second. And for us, that's really important because we're a pretty slow build. Again, 7 seconds, we're trying to one-shot our opponent. That's not guaranteed. So if we need to get to that 14-second mark, we're going to want to have this bonk skill for sure. There's also the strength skill here at silver, so plus 15 damage is pretty nice. Notably, the thug also has this diamond bar of gold. This sells for 40. So if we defeat the thug and we get this bar of gold here, we just got 40 gold plus what the thug gave us, which I believe is 3. So that can be a huge, 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 huge swing for us. Other than that, later into the days here, we can go to day 9 where we have the elite duelist. They have the big ego skill, which says your weapons have lifesteal. That can make up for a lot of the troubles that we have by being kind of aggressively killed by Vanessas or Dualies or Pygmalions. We just lifesteal it all back. Not a bad one to have. We don't really want a lot of else what they have. They also have the strength skill, the knife set. It looks good, but our items are just not going off enough to where this knife set is going to be super consistently dealing damage. It also has a pretty low starting damage value. So just, if it can be good, I won't say it's bad, but it's generally not ideal. And additionally, the last thing here, on day 10, we can go to Boss Harrow. Boss Harrow has assault focus. Whenever a non-weapon item is used, slow it for 2 seconds. Well, we don't have any non-weapon items, so we're basically slowing our opponent's items. The Boss Harrow also has Keen Eye, so giving us crit chance. They have the strength skill. All these skills are going to work very, very well for us. So now that we talked about how to assemble everything and what items we're looking for, what skills, what monsters, let's see it in practice. So we see this 10 win here from this user where they are leveraging the crook at diamond here to put a lot of damage onto their longbow, and then they have a shielded flail that's doing a lot of damage. This phonograph again means that this item is going to be going off 50% faster. They also have diamond tier weights, which I'm not going to lie to you in saying that this is incredible based off of the skills and the items that I'm seeing, but it is a way to put more damage onto their multicast square items. So with this, we could also see something like an Atlatl in this slot, or we could maybe even seeing like a Lion's Cane. But additionally, the bigger thing to look at, I think, is their skills here. So they have heavy firepower, which at diamond tier is going to give plus 75 damage across the board. They have gold strength. They have the crit skill, whenever any person uses an item, so whether it is them or their opponent, all items are gaining crit chance. They have that augmented weaponry here where they are scaling damage for every small weapon that they buy. When they're using a non-weapon item here, one weapon is getting charged for a second. They also have some cooldown reduction. They have shielding. They have more damage. There's a lot that is going on to this build behind the scenes with the skills and making for a very, very potent board. But before I continue here, I just want to also quickly note that it's something I talked about in the beginning here, but the square build, it can be good, but it is not always going to be good. I strongly, strongly recommend that if it's not working out for you, you don't have an item that you are value stacking or damage stacking, you don't have a skill that you're getting a lot of damage from, pivot off of it. And let's talk about a build that we can pivot to. Max health. Good to be healthy, right? Good to have the maximum amount of health. You know, this is just getting the maximum amount of HP, getting as much bulk, as much mass as you can to be the biggest Pygmalion in the world. But what does this mean in practice? So, we're stacking as much HP as possible, as I just said. We want to be making ourselves very huge. But the thing is, with this build is, we're not really starting out looking for the max HP build. We have to transition into it. There's not a lot of items in the game that are going to allow you to outright start stacking max HP. There are some skills that can do that. We can think about like a healthy hoarder or something of that nature, but you generally are not going to be able to have access to this game plan until later into the days. We can start picking up chocolates and things of that nature pretty early on, but the damage or the money that you're putting into your chocolates and gaining max HP from based off the, or compared to rather, the max HP that you could gain through items that are specifically doing that. That's what their function are saying, gain max HP. Um, you are going to have a much better return on investment by finding those items. So you're probably going to start with an early to mid game build like that square build. That square build can go the distance, but it's less likely than this max HP build. So you might start with that in the mid game and then transition to this max HP build once you find the right items. And with this build, you're going to need at least a double whammy or a lion's cane. This is going to allow you to do damage. This build, you in the bazaar currently, especially in the later days, you cannot just have max HP and just have too much for your opponent to have gone through. Currently, builds in the bazaar can stack obscene amounts of damage. We can think of this maybe stopping something like a weapon spam Vanessa, but even then, with diamond shark claws or something of this nature, you could have 16,000 HP and they will still kill you. We're going to see builds that go way beyond that 16,000 mark, but you need to have some form of being proactive instead of reactive with this build. You can't win on defenses alone currently. And then once you have that damage dealer, you're going to need cooldown reduction. The Lion's Cane goes off, I believe, at 7 seconds as well. That's an okay timing, but again, you're going to want to hit them hard, hit them once and have one shot at them. And if you can't do that, especially in the late game, if it gets frozen or something like that, you're probably not going to be living, regardless of how much max HP that you have. And then the double whammy has an obscenely long cooldown, so we need to find a way to reduce that. But let's talk about the items themselves. So we can see something like a belt, which is going to give us max HP. We're also going to see Lemonade Stand, which will allow us to stack max HP. It's one of the enablers. The Lion Cane is going to be doing damage. Signet Ring is going to give us max HP and income. Whenever we're visiting a shop, we gain more max HP. The Pawn Shop is a great max HP enabler in that we can also use it similarly to Lemonade Stand, where we can sell items. The Pawn Shop's going to get bigger and we're going to have more max HP when the pawn shop is on our board based off its value. Double whammy is a way to ultimately convert that max HP into damage, and so is hogwash. Hogwash innately is going to heal you based off a percentage of your max HP, but if we can get like a fiery upgrade or a poison upgrade onto this, the hogwash can also be our damage dealer. But let's go more in depth. Let's start with the belt here. So the belt, it may look unimpressive, but it says that you have plus 50, 75, or 100% max health. Again, this might seem like nothing, but how max HP scales in the game, just based off that property, gaining 100% max health is going to be a huge boon for you. Doubling your health pool is crazy good, and thus the belt is something that you do not want to overlook, regardless of if it can't get upgraded. It is just going to enable your build to go from dealing an okay amount of damage to dealing a ludicrous amount of damage. And then let's look at that way to deal damage. So here's that Lion's Cane. It's going to deal damage equal to 10 or 20% of our max health. But also, when we level up, we're permanently going to be gaining max health. So this item is one that we can just kind of, even if we're not playing the max HP build, we can just keep it in our backpack. And every time we level up, we're going to gain more max health. So that's a pretty big get for us. But this item, if we are doing this build appropriately, can just one-shot our opponents because of the amount of HP that we have. And the other big damage dealer is the double whammy, which is doing something pretty similar, if not exact, where it says that it's dealing damage equal to 10, 15, or 20% of our max health to our opponent, and it has 2 times multicast. So it is double the amount of damage of the Lion's Cane, but don't be fooled here because it has a 12-second cooldown, which is not to say that it has a 14-second cooldown compared to the Lion's Cane being at 7 seconds. So that is the analog there, so it's 2 seconds faster. But 12 seconds is so slow. That's why we need to find a way to either give this Radiant or the Radiant enchantment here, which says it can't be frozen, slowed, or destroyed, or we need to find a way to reduce this item's cooldown. The double whammy without any defenses on your board, and again, if we're thinking that max HP is not really the greatest defense, We are going to need something to bridge that gap. We're going to need a way to this to go off faster, or we need a way to either freeze our opponent's items so that this can go off. This item alone with a lot of max HP will not get you there. It's in the current meta, probably just going to get frozen or slowed to death. So you need to have a game plan if you're using this weapon. That's where something like the phonograph can come in. We've seen this come into play in a couple different builds here. It says the item to the left of this has its cooldown reduced by 25 or 50% based off the tier it's at. So keep this in mind when you're in the late game and you have your double whammy or you have your lion's cane. You're going to aggressively want to be looking for this phonograph because 50% cooldown reduction is maybe one of the highest, if not the highest way of cooldown reduction that you can have on Pygmalion into the late game. There's different ways to charge your items that can make them go off faster, but if we're talking about just straight cooldown reduction and percentage numbers, the phonograph is going to be the biggest and baddest way to do that. But we also talked about some other max HP items here. We talked about the pawn shop. It says when you sell an item, this gains 1, 2, or 3 value, and then you have increased max health when it's on the board equal to 10, 15, or 20 times this item's value. Notably, it has some really, really interesting enchantments. So if you don't find a double whammy and you don't find a lion's cane, what are you doing with all this max health? Well, you can get a pawn shop to get an enchantment on it with something like toxic, fiery, or obsidian, which says your weapons have plus damage equal to this item's value, or your poisoned items have plus 10% of more poison equal to this item's value. There are ways to leverage your little items that you have on board that aren't doing a lot into large amounts of numbers of poison, fire, or burn, or even healing and shielding. This can work well in those builds. The problem with this is that you really want one of these 3 enchantments. And even then, there's not a lot of poisoning items, if not any poisoning items on Pygmalion now that I think about it. So really, you would have to find a poison item to work alongside it. You would also have to find a burn item or, it's not too hard to find a burn item or a weapon, but you're not guaranteed to get one of these 3. So you can't really plan on your pawn shop being the main way for you to win the game. It's kind of like when we're talking about value stacking normally, we want to get an enchantment on our big value stacked item, but we also need a backup plan in case that enchantment doesn't work out well for us. So just have a backup plan if you're going to be relying on your pawn shop. Another max health item here, we have the lemonade stand. It says when you sell a small item, you permanently gain max health. The lemonade stand as a source of healing can be played on the board. I'm going to advise you not to do that if you can help it. It can be good. Don't get me wrong, it can be good, but generally speaking, you're going to want to utilize this primarily in your backpack for its max health gaining properties. Yes, you can put burn on it, you can put obsidian on it, you can put toxic on it, all these great things, but generally speaking, especially when you're going to find this at silver tier, there are more powerful things that you can be doing outside of this. It still is going to be very potent if you're burning equal to 10 times this item's heal, but that's not necessarily going to be good enough in a lot of portions of the game, just because the lemonade stand itself is not like a pawn shop. It's not providing you a static amount of max HP on your board. The pawn shop is going to be providing way more max HP than your lemonade stand is. Realistically, the lemonade stand is probably not going to give you more max HP than even something like a belt throughout the entirety of the game. So this is certainly a good item for bridging the gap and kind of starting off your max HP scaling, especially if you're getting gumballs, which will be gaining 400 max HP, that sort of thing. But they're just bigger and badder ways that we can be maximizing our max HP. And another easy way to be gaining some max health is through the signet ring. It takes up 1 slot in your backpack. You just buy it, forget about it, and you're getting max health every hour, which is really nice. And you also gain some income to boot. If you can get the shiny or the golden upgrade on this, that's pretty nice too, but I wouldn't really be prioritizing that, just kind of something extra that can help make this item even better. Okay, so now we're big, we're beautiful, we may have 4 legs and a tail, what are we doing with our skills? So we want skills that are going to synergize well with our max HP or give us more max HP, like large appetites, or we're going to want cooldown reduction or ways to charge our items. So we can see that through like long strides, shield bash, reserve shields is also going to be giving us some shielding based off our max HP. And let's take a closer look at those skills. So here's Shield Bash. It says the first 4 to 8 times your enemy uses a non-weapon item each fight, you're going to charge a weapon. So again, we're probably going to have one weapon and one weapon only. That's going to be the Lion's Cane or the double whammy. And when our item or when our enemy uses their non-weapon items, they're charging our item. And ideally, our Lion's Cane or our double whammy is so big that it one-shots them, and that's the game over with. So we can use our enemy's items against them. Additionally, we can again look at something like long strides, which gives us cooldown reduction on our boards if we have 5 or fewer items, which generally we will. And then if we're looking for premium max health skills, large appetites is very potent. At diamond tier, it's going to give you plus 2000 max health, which is just a crazy amount of max health to get through one skill. And if we're using large items, we can get something like Reserve Shield, which shields equal to our max health. There's actually a lot of these sort of effects in the game. There's 3 that are nearly identical in that they're Defense Grid, Hard Shell, and Hunker Down. These all are going to be shielding you equal to your max health when you basically meet a certain requirement, whether that's falling below half health or if that's using an item. But this can create a tremendous amount of shielding. So this is like pretty good to look for early on because we're essentially going to be adding 10, 20, 35, or 50% more max health to our board. It's not going to count towards our items, but it is going to count towards our survivability, which is very nice. So what monsters are we going to be looking at to try and help us with our build? So the first one that I want to take a look at is Eccentric Aetheryte. Again, for this rigged skill here, the Eccentric Aetheryte, you're probably going to want to fight it every time you can regardless, just because on day 3, it's going to give you the most max amount of experience, but you also have a 1 in 5 chance of getting the rigged skill, which again, if we have a very slow item, hasting our item at the beginning of combat is very important, and hasting for 3 seconds and hasting 2 items at that is pretty strong. We can also see that upgrading it is going to haste it even further, so if we can haste that double whammy for 5 seconds, it's nearly gone off at that point. So this is a very potent one to have. Can also keep scrolling down here, and we can go to something like the Kyver Commander, who has Counter-Strike. It's very similar to the Shield Bash skill, but it says that the first 5 times, and then your enemy uses a weapon, you charge an item for 1, 2, or 3 seconds, depending on its tier. So if we have one item on board, like the Lion's Cane or the double whammy, one item that ultimately has a cooldown, it's all going to go onto that item. So if we have like a pawn shop, a belt, a double whammy, and then let's just say another belt or something like that, something that doesn't have a cooldown, those items are not going to eat up the Counter-Strike. The only item, again, that's going to get the cooldown or get the charge is the one that has a cooldown, and thus your weapon is going to go off much more quickly. Insect wings are also very good here. Being at gold tier, a 9% cooldown reduction on your weapons can be very, very big indeed. There's also something like the Dire Mosquito, which says that when you slow, haste a weapon for 1 second, so you could get a nice little slow synergy onto our board. We can get an insect wing here, which can be pretty good. Can actually also go to the other mosquito here, the giant mosquito, which has the rush skill, very similar to the eccentric aetheryte skill, which says at the start of each fight, haste a weapon for 3 seconds. So this can help get our build off the ground very quickly. But going down to later in the game here, we can go to someone like Sergeant Suds, who has the Hogwash, which again, we didn't take a look at, but it is going to scale pretty nicely with our max health. It's going to give us max health in the fight. And if we can put fiery or poison on it, this is going to be pretty good for us. Additionally, we can look at something like Car Conductor, who again has the Captain's Wheel. They also have some other pieces here, like a cog that could be good just for a little bit of hasting. If we can make our big weapon a vehicle through something like thrusters, we can utilize these vehicle skills as well, but that's not innate to Pygmalion, so just keep that in mind. And then the last one I want to talk about is, of course, the Property Baron, because they have the big numbers skill. If you have the double whammy, get the big numbers. You have 50% crit chance on your double whammy. That's very potent. So, putting all of our knowledge into practice here, what does it look like on the board? So, we see this user Nestorn here has assembled a pretty nice one. They have the pawn shop at diamond, they have a belt at diamond, they have that double whammy doing 10,000 damage every hit. It has a 2 times multicast. And then they have this Kiowas on top of that looks to have, I believe, the shiny upgrade. So, or is that the golden one? I can't remember. Either way, big Kiowas to go along with it, but it's really this double whammy, doing over 20,000 damage every time it goes off. And if we can think about this person, they're at level 18. I imagine they won in like day 16. Yeah, probably day 15 or 16 in that area, maybe even a little sooner. Regardless, they have 68,000 max health. 68,000. To put in perspective, Mac starts with 200 max HP. So it's like the amount of health that you have comparatively is crazy. We can even think on most day 10s, a player is going to have between 2,000 to 4,000 health, something in that nature. They might have a little bit more, a little bit less, but that's generally the numbers that I see. This player has 68,000 health. I mean, that's crazy. But again, the builds in the Bazaar are crazy. On day 16, you can have a person who can do 68,000 damage easily, just because at that point, the only builds that are surviving in those later parts of the games are the builds that are very good and that do ridiculous things. So this build in its own right, doing 20,000 damage, will probably one-shot every single opponent. However, they have to get there first. But this is where that max HP comes in handy. They also have this skill here that's going to remove the burning and slowing and the freezing and the poisoning from themselves and their items. They also have the shielding. Because this is at bronze, they're going to get 10% of their max HP in terms of shields, so that's pretty nice. And they have a little bit of crit chance on these two skills over here too. So it's not unlikely that this this double whammy here is going to crit as well. And we don't know what cooldown reduction they put onto their board. But yeah, this build can be very potent. Again, ideally we would want something to make this double whammy go off more quickly, but 68,000 max HP is a lot. It's a lot. And now for a build that is a little weird and different. This is the small item spam build. One that takes a little finesse and doesn't seem that powerful on the surface, maybe because it's not that powerful, but certainly one that can help you through the mid and early portions of the Bazaar. So what's the game plan here? Well, we are trying to pick up as many small non-weapon items as we can, and we're focusing on finding the matchbox and the yo-yo. These are going to be our two enablers for this build, and it's going to capitalize off of all these small items going off very quickly. Basically, we're going to want to get all these different items that have the lowest cooldown, or at least are going to be going off as fast as they can. Things like marbles or even like a robe would work well with this. We'll see in a few moments all the different items. But then we're going to find a stat stacker like weights or Gonjo that can give those small items more stats, or they can give our yo-yo more damage. And thus, if our yo-yo is going off because all these small items are going off and chaining it to go off, we can stack up a pretty good amount of damage with the yo-yo. Now, here's the big thing. We need to find a direction to pivot to before the end game with this build. We cannot reliably utilize the small weapons or the small item spam build to get to the end game. We have to have something that is going to propel us into a better late game build. That's not to say that we can't win with this build and that we couldn't even go with a 10 win with this build, but it's just so unlikely that we get all the pieces to align to do that consistently at this point of the Bazaar. So we need to have a different build to go into, and that's where we're going to utilize maybe like a burn build or a drum build, which we'll talk about later in this video. So let's look at some key items here. So as we talked about the matchbox, this is probably the number one item we're going to be looking for. This is going to really be the damage dealer that this run needs. Second in line is the yo-yo. This is much harder to enable and much harder and slower to stack damage wise, but it still can be very potent. And additionally, how do we get our items to go off very quickly? Well, we can utilize something like Piggles, which is going to be generating items for us every time we win, but it's also going to be charging our small items adjacent to it. Additionally, the marbles here is going to be charged every time we use an item adjacent to it. The robe has that same text as well. And then we can see something like an Uwashawali bird, which is going to have multicast for every property that we have. So if we don't find a lot of small items, we can maybe find a property or two and utilize our bird to have many iterations of it going off, which can charge our matchbox or our yo-yo. Now we're also going to need something like weights or a gonjo. That's going to be our damage stacker if we're utilizing a yo-yo. And then something that synergizes well with all of this is the bushel. The bushel has a pretty high amount of HP that it's healing, and it's also getting charged every time you shield. There's a lot of terrible shielding items that Pygmalien has that are small and have pretty low cooldowns, so you can turn all of those shielding triggers into healing, which ultimately is going to turn into damage if we're utilizing a matchbox or yo-yo alongside our bushel. So let's dive deeper in. Matchbox. It's a burn item. It's got a 5-second cooldown. And when you use any non-weapon item, you charge this 1 second. So that's where we can just spam a bunch of these small, generally do nothing, or little items that do nothing. These items that are inconsequential, that'll shield you 1 or give your board +1 shielding, like a little Piggles or something of that nature. Give your board +2% crit chance. Things that are generally not going to affect your game plan, but because they have low cooldowns, we can then utilize them to charge our matchbox and put on a lot of burn on our opponent. Additionally, the other one that we talked about was the yo-yo, which has a 4-second cooldown, and it deals 1 damage, and it says when you use an adjacent item, you charge it 1, 2, 3, or 4, dependent on the tier that it's at. So we again need some way to give this yo-yo damage. It inherently is not going to be good enough. It is going to go off very quickly, which again works well with our small item spam. However, it is going to be doing 1 damage. That's not anywhere near enough for our purposes here. So we have to find some way to buff this up. But again, we can look at some other items that synergize well with that. We can see robe, which says when you use an adjacent item, charge this 1 second. It also shields for 100, which is pretty nice. And at diamond tier, which you probably don't want to get this to diamond if you don't have to, it has a 4-second cooldown. So this thing can be going off like crazy. But the one that you're probably going to see early is the Piggles. So this Piggles has an 8-second cooldown. It charges adjacent items, adjacent small items, very notably. And it says when you win a fight, you get a Piggle. So it's going to give you one of these random little toy Piggles who all have different effect. You're going to get one randomly. These items are okay. They are not bad, I'll say. They could even be good if we upgrade our Piggles, which in general I think is not a horrible idea. But you can be putting 8, 12, 16 damage on your yo-yo or another multicast weapon, something like that. These aren't terrible items. It's just that they themselves are probably not going to be more powerful than an item that you could replace them with that you could buy from Pygmalien normally. So the Piggles, it's a pretty important item to have for this build just because it allows you to fill your board with a 4-second cooldown small item. 4 seconds is pretty low cooldown. A lot of items in the early game have a breakpoint of like between 5 and 7 seconds. So this is a little bit faster than all of those items that you could be getting. And again, there's plenty of horrible Pygmalion items that you could be picking up in these slots, and these Piggles might just be a little bit better than them. Another pretty important item for this build is marbles. The slowing is good, but really the big thing here is that it says when you use an adjacent item, you charge this 1 second. So it's just like the robe, but it is small, thus it's taking up less space. It allows us to put more items onto the board, and it can work well in conjunction with the robe. Generally, what we want to do is put either a robe or marbles next to our matchbox because our matchbox is going to be the item that's going off most consistently. But if we are playing with a yo-yo build and not a matchbox build, weights is generally what we're going to want to get. This says your weapons gain damage and your heal items gain heal for the fight, depending on its tier. And when you overheal, you charge this 1 second. So this will actually damage scale and heal scale your board in the mid and early game to a point where the weights is very strong. Getting to the late game here, the weights certainly falls off and you're probably going to need to find a different build. But if you can get a build that is overhealing really rapidly, you can charge the weights very quickly. That's where something like a bushel comes in, which has a 4-second cooldown. It says when you shield, you charge this 1 second. So if you can even get a shielded bushel or get a bunch of small shielding items, the bushel can be going off like crazy, and thus that could overheal you and make your weights go off much more quickly. But again, if we're utilizing our weights later into the game, we could enchant it, which would make it a viable source of damage or viable source of scaling, or just powerful enough to keep up with some late game builds. Again, you're probably not going to want to do that, but you got to do what you got to do. And if that's the case, then putting shielding on it's not horrible. It's basically going to give that value stacking or damage stacking, that I'll just say stat stacking property to your shields every time that it goes off. Deadly is going to give your items plus 20% crit chance for the fight every time it goes off. So this one is actually pretty insane. It can be giving a lot of freezing a medium or small item for 4 seconds on an item that could be going off very quickly is very potent. So that's certainly a synergy. And then poison and fiery are also very good. You could get obsidian on it. A lot of these enchantments work very, very well on the weights. I wouldn't recommend doing that if you don't have to, but again, if it's all that you got going, enchant the weights and you'll probably be pretty happy with whatever you end up with. Its analog here is the Gonjo. The Gonjo is similar to the weights, but it only gives adjacent items that bonus, which is still good. It has a 5-second cooldown, which is pretty decent. Mainly what you're going to want to do with this is utilize an item that has both the weapon and shielding or both the heal and shielding properties. So we could look at something like bandages, which has the heal and shielding property. So if you put this next to the Gonjo, it's going to get both buffed healing and buff shielding. So we can add a lot of damage onto a board, or a lot of healing onto a board that way. We could look at force field, which we can get I wouldn't say consistently, but it is available to us through monster fights like the eccentric etherite. If we get that, it has the shielding and damage property. So again, the Gonjo work well with that. Basically anything that can really take advantage of this. We can even use something that has a 2x cooldown or 2x multicast like the Holodie. So we're putting double damage onto the Holodie essentially, or even something like Knuckles, which has double damage. Whatever we get, we are going to make sure that it is going to be gaining as much value as we can, as many stats as we can get on it from the Gonjo. And then, even a bronze tier Gonjo, if you are putting 2 items that have 2 properties next to it, whether that's healing, shielding, or any combination of these 3, then you're adding 40 points of stats to your board every 5 seconds. In the early game, that's way better than most items are putting out every 5 seconds. So this can be pretty potent, especially in conjunction with different items that have good synergies with those items, like a flail or a yo-yo, something of that nature. And I won't go too deep into the skills here because I think that the skills themselves can have a lot of variability with which ones that you want to get based off of what small items that you find. But I think ones that are generally ubiquitously going to be good are going to be Hotspot, which we'll look at in a second, but whenever you use your leftmost item, you will burn. Final Flame or Immolating Spark, this is just adding static burn to your board. Conflagration, not conglomeration. Hey, listen, I have dyslexia, but even I can read that. Come on now, self. Either way, we love ourselves, okay? We have lots of self-acceptance around here. Conflagration is definitely good. It's whenever you burn, you're going to give your items that burned more burn, so you're burn stacking. And then Healthy Hoarder. This says for, I believe, each non-weapon item that you have, you're going to be gaining max HP. And you're spamming a bunch of non-weapon items, so it's going to work out pretty well. So first up here is Hotspot. So when you use your leftmost item, you're going to burn 2, 3, or 4. If we have a matchbox, essentially we're adding 2, 3, or 4 burn to it. If we can't find a matchbox, well, we can make our marbles a matchbox. We can make our robe a matchbox. Any item that's going to be having or going to be going off very quickly and very consistently, well, we just built our own matchbox by finding this hotspot. It additionally is at silver tier, so it's not unlikely that we see that when we're going to be getting our silver tier skills from our guaranteed level ups. So this is one that when we click that burn tier or burn skills or click the silver tier skills, this one can show up and be very potent. And we can look at conflagration. When you use an item with burn, it gains more burn. It's going to work obviously very well with a matchbox. Every time it goes off, which it's going off a lot, it's going to be burning a lot. And then here's Healthy Hoarder. It says you have plus 35, 100, 200, 300 max health for each non-weapon item that you have. Well, there's 10 slots on your board, so we can do the math here. At bronze, you're getting 350. At silver, you're going to be getting 1,000, then 2,000, then 3,000 max health with this. So Healthy Hoarder, very strong. Notably, Healthy Hoarder can also show up as a gold tier skill when you have your 3 starting options. So if you can get Healthy Hoarder in your early game, that's really the only skill you need. Generally, a day 1, 2, and 3, a lot of builds are just not going to even have the damage to be able to deal with plus 200 health for every non-weapon item that you have. It's just going to be simply too much for them. So even if your items suck, you just have so much max HP in that early game. Get like maybe 5 regeneration or something like that, and you'll be sitting pretty. So Healthy Hoarder, definitely one you want to look out for. And what does this build look like in practice? Well, I'll be the first to admit I don't have the greatest of example, but in my video where I stack the land scraper, and I'll put a link to it here for you to watch, you can see that we kind of pivot off of the small items build, but utilize it to sort of bridge the gap. So we have our robe, we have our matchbox, we have our piggles, and then we have a blue piggles here, items that are going to be going off semi-consistently, but this is really kind of like a post-mortem. This is after we have decided that we're not really going to be wanting to do this. You can even see that we have different builds in our backpack that we are seeing if we're going to pivot into, just because we know that we don't want to be doing this that often. We have a Regal Blade, we have an ice cream truck, we have this silk scarf here, which is our main source of, I guess, damage with our spiky shield. But notably here, again, this build, we could have gone fully into it. We chose not to, but it is one that is available to us. I know this is not the greatest example, but this is me really wanting to show you that it can be flexible. You can fit it into a lot of setups. And even if we're utilizing like half the build, this is still pretty potent just to have a robe and a matchbox next to each other. These are going to be going off pretty quickly, and thus we're going to be gaining a lot of shield. We're going to be putting on a lot of burn under our opponents, but it's not something we decided to do late game. It again is something that you can do into the later portions of the game. It's just much harder to pull off. So don't be afraid to go down this route if you want to use this small build. I know even without having a great example, it may be giving off the impression like it's not good. No, it is good. It's just not going to be powerfully scaling into the later portions of the game like you could do with other builds on Pygmalien. But speaking of other builds on Pygmalien that we could potentially transition into, well, here's the burn build, and I think you know what this one's going to be about. So we're burning. We're burning as much as we can. What's our game plan? Well, again, we find that matchbox. That matchbox could have looked like that small weapon spam build. We also want to be finding something like a steam ladle or a QS. The QS is more of a value stack build, but it can work well with this too. The QS doesn't need, 400 burn on it. If it's still doing like 50 burn or something of that nature, that's still a lot of burn. So it doesn't need to be as big as possible. With all that, all your burn items are potent, but they require specific synergies. So you're going to play into that synergy. Steam Ladle, as we're going to see, it requires freeze. Matchbox, as we talked about, wants small non-weapons. The QoS wants value stack. So when you're playing this burn build, you have to really more so be playing to the item that you have and not the build that you want, essentially. You know that you want your Steam Ladle to be big, well, you have to play freeze. You know that you want your matchbox to go off more, you play non-weapons. So you have to be adaptable to what is presented to you in the Bazaar. In general, I think that the most consistent way to win in the game is to take each vendor that you see for what they are and analyze them to see what is the most powerful thing that you could be doing with what's available to you. I think in every single run that I've seen, there are multiple builds that can go 10 wins just from the items that you see alone, but it's on you to figure out how you're going to navigate that. So there's a bunch of ways to get across that finish line and get to the 10 wins, and it's on you to figure out which synergies are going to be most potent and which are presenting in the way that you can take advantage of. It's not to say there aren't some runs where you're going to be, I don't know, looking for that one key build, maybe your freeze build, and you're looking for like a giant club or something like that, and you can't find it, and you just keep looking and looking, but you never find it. Well, that's where you separate the decent players from the good players from the great players. The great players are going to be able to see what items are in front of them. They're going to be able to know how to leverage the synergies that are available to them with the resources that they have and be able to pivot between the builds. It's not something that comes easily, but I guarantee with enough games and through content like this where you know what builds are available, you're going to become better at it over time. So don't despair if you're not able to do it now. It's not the easiest skill to pick up, but once you get into the groove of it, I think you're going to have a lot more fun with the game and you're going to be winning way more. Anyway, this is all to say that the burn build has a lot of different directions that you can go. And you're also going to want to incorporate some amount of survivability in your build in the mid to late game. So the burn build in itself, just by the nature of doing the damage, you know, there is not a lot of burst potential that you generally have unless you're playing a QoS build. If you're playing a Steam Ladle or Matchbox build, you're going to build up that burn over time. So you're going to need some sort of survivability to not just get bursted down by someone like Dooley or Vanessa. Additionally, with a Mac who's trying to do the same thing and burn you a lot, the Mac is probably going to put more burn on you, but you as Pig have better survivability tools than the Mac. So that's kind of how you create the power imbalance there and get an advantage into that matchup. Obviously, you can't control who you're facing in the Bazaar, so you got to work with what you got. And that's why you're generally going to want some sort of survivability when you're playing this build, and we'll see what items facilitate that here. So here are these items. So again, I talked about the matchbox. We've seen that item before. I now want to talk about the sauna. So this item looks a bit innocuous, as we'll see, but this is going to provide both burning and healing, and every time you burn, you're going to heal and gain regeneration. So this item alone can do really great things. In addition, with a vineyard is an item that is going to give your healing items more healing based off its value. So in combination with a sauna and a vineyard, you can be healing a ton when you are burning. And then we're going to see items like Steam Ladle here, which is going to gain more burn when we freeze. The QoS we've looked at, it's going to be a value stacking burn item. Hot Stones. Hot Stones is not something you want to the late game, but is very strong early, giving you both burn and regeneration. And then Private Hot Springs is a very, very potent burn item into the late game especially. It looks, again, a little innocuous, but I think if you can facilitate the right synergies, this one can be pretty insane. Now let's look at the items a little more closely. So here's that sauna I was talking about. So it has this tag here, 7-second cooldown, and it'll burn. This is okay. This is not really why we buy this item. We buy this item for this clause. It says when you burn, you're going to heal 15, 30, or 45 and gain 2, 4, or 6 regeneration. So this is a static effect. This means that anytime any item burns, you're going to heal and gain regeneration. So it doesn't have to be the sauna. Any burn item is going to proc this. And again, as we saw, we can pair it up with something like a vineyard, which says your heal items have plus heal equal to this item's value. So we can value stack a vineyard, and then we can put it alongside the sauna. and the sauna could be healing a tremendous amount every time we're burning. We could be putting on a very small amount of burn onto our opponents, but our healing could just be so tremendous that we have enough defenses to be able to defeat our opponents. So this is one that I would not sleep on here. And let's look at hot stones. Hot stones, 6-second cooldown. If you get it to silver tier, this is where it really shines. It's not necessarily giving you a ton of burn, but it is giving you a lot of regeneration. And it can proc something like a sauna, which is nice. But gaining 4 regeneration on days like 1 through 5 is a pretty large amount of regen to be getting from a single item. Less so on day 5, much more so on day 1. Regardless, this regen, it going off, and I generally think about fights in terms of 30 seconds because that's when the sandstorm comes in. So in 30 seconds, it's going to be going off 5 times. So it could be giving you 20 regeneration. That's a lot. That could be substantial, again, when we're facing a lot of opponents who are trying to burst us down and things of that nature. We would generally want this to be healing, but in conjunction with a healing item like a sauna, this can be a really great tool for us to utilize. And speaking of tools, let's look at the steam ladle. So one big note about it, you can get it at bronze and it's a 4-second cooldown. So it's one of the faster small weapons that you can, or the small items rather, that you can get. It is in fact a non-weapon, but it's going to burn 2. But here's the big clause. It says when you freeze, this gains 2, 4, 6, or 8 burn. So every instance of freeze, let's say we have an item that freezes 3 items for 1 second. Each one of those items being frozen counts as another instance of this. So if we freeze 3 items and we have a bronze tier steam ladle, we're getting plus 6 burn on this thing. And the fact that it has a 4-second cooldown means that it's going off pretty quickly, and thus it's going off pretty consistently, and it's going to be doing a lot of damage to our opponents. We'll talk about the freeze build a little bit later, but this is going to be a crux of that build, and it's one that also synergizes very well with your other burn items in that it itself is burning very quickly. And I think one of the most interesting items that's in this burn category is the private hot springs. This works really well with the steam ladle because it says the first time you fall below half health each fight, you freeze all other items for 3 seconds. So just as I talked about, if you have an item that's freezing 3 items, well, you get 3 instances of proccing on your steam ladle. Well, if you have, let's say, if there's 10 or even 15 items total on both you and your opponent's board, so you have 15 items altogether, the steam ladle is gonna see 15 items frozen. And thus, you're gonna get 15 procs on your steam ladle. But also notably, you're gonna get 15 procs on the private hot springs itself. It has this clause here, it says when you freeze, charge this 4 seconds. And it has a 6-second cooldown. So it's gonna be going off a lot. And 8 and 12 burn is not a small amount. It also is going to give you a lot of regen. So let's say you're facing like a weapons Vanessa, one build that's very common right now in the Bazaar. Well, they get you to half health, you freeze all of their little weapons, you freeze all of your items, you have this 3-second buffer where you're putting on a ton of burn on them, but you also just put a ton of regeneration onto yourself. So you created a lot of defense in this small amount of time, and thus you can really leverage this to kind of heal back up a lot and create this gap of health and threshold to where your burn can defeat your opponent before you beat you. So this is a very, very potent item. Now I just want to quickly look at the skills here. It's pretty obvious which skills you want. You want anything that says burn or anything that'll increase your healing if you have that sauna, but also one that to keep in the back of your mind is this frostfire, which is the first time you burn each fight, freeze 1 item for 2, 3, or 4 seconds. It's pretty obvious that these skills are good, but you also just have a lot of items that specifically synergize with freezing on Pygmalien that are your burn items. So when you use one of those burn items, again, like a hot springs or something like that, you're going to freeze your opponent's board. It's going to charge your hot springs again, or it's going to charge your steam ladle, whatever it might be. So just keep this in the back of your mind. This is like extra important or extra powerful when we're looking at burn items. But we can also look at what monsters that we would like to see here. So there are some specific monsters in the Bazaar that do give you burn items, and we can look at like the Flame Juggler here, who says the first time your enemy falls below half health each fight, burn 10. not gonna lie, this one is not super potent, but you can get a cinders from them, which can work very nicely. You can look at something like the Infernal Envoy, which is a little bit better. They don't have a skill that necessarily synergizes with burn, but cooldown reduction is very strong. And if you can get a restorative fire claw, this could take the place of something like that sauna, and it could put a ton of burn and damage onto your opponent. So definitely, if you again went to like day 5 and you had the choice between Juggler and Infernal Envoy, I would definitely go for the Envoy. But the big get here is really Scoville. You can get the fiery skill from them. You can also get one of these really potent burn items. So um, even something like a Silver Cinders is pretty nice. Curry's pretty good, just in that it's charging your other small items for 3 seconds or charging another one. Um, these are pretty decent. You would need to find some additional synergies with them, but that's definitely something that we can do. Uh, Additionally, we can look at maybe the biggest one of them all, which is the Infernal. The Infernal has so many great things for you. Diamond Cinders is really nice. Tracer Fire can give crit chance to your burn items. You can get this Burning Rage. When you burn, your weapons gain +4 damage for the fight, so you could put like a yo-yo on board, and then suddenly your yo-yo is getting really huge. Playing with the Infernal Greatsword is always a fun one to try and enable. It's pretty difficult, but if you can get it to go off, it does feel pretty good. But yeah, there's a couple different monsters in the Bazaar. There's not a lot of ton of burn synergy ones specifically. We can also look at like Ghost Pepper, which is maybe the biggest get of them all, because if you can get this Heat Lover skill, which says when you burn, gain 6 regen, that's really tremendous. Also fiery burn skill, which is really nice. And then the Radiant Corsair has the Flame Dancer skill. The Flame Dancer themselves has a Flame Dancer skill, but they also have something like a Lighthouse and a Fiery Katana. The Fiery Katana is honestly pretty good, just in that it is going to be burning, being like a consistent source of very quick burn damage. So if you are utilizing that again with something like a sauna, you could be generating a lot of regeneration very quickly and early into the fight. But really, you want that fire rebirth skill. The first time you would die, each fight heal to full. I mean, every character wants that. It's good stuff to get. But let's put all this knowledge into practice here. So we see this build from Inferno Lich, which is very aptly named here, this burn build that they have. So they have 2 saunas. They have this steam ladle here that's shiny, so it's going off twice. They also, I believe, have a shiny Ushawali bird. How does that? No, I think one. How many properties do they have? Oh no, they have 4. Never mind. That's a turbo Ushawali bird. Even better. So this is going to be going off a lot. They have Ointment, which is going to be cleansing some of their burn and poison, but they have 2 saunas, which is pretty crazy here. So they're going to be healing up a lot here, because this matchbox is going to see all these items going off, as we talked about in our small non-weapons build, our small item spam build. The more we can get our little weapons, or little non-weapons rather, to go off, the more it goes off, thus the more healing and regen we get. We even have a shielded sauna, so this is going to be going off and giving them shield. And they also have the Snow Globe, which with its 3 times multicast, it's going to be getting this Steam Ladle up pretty high, with pretty high numbers. And yeah, this burn build, it is real. It is, the only problem with it is, compared to the burn builds of Mac and Dooley, and even Vanessa, you're one of the slower ones to ramp up, or you don't put on a ton of burn very early, unless you have something like a Kiowas. However, you are one of the most survivable burn builds, so you're trading some of your offense for defense, which can still be very potent. It's just kind of matchup dependent on how effective that's going to be. But they also have some nice skills here. They have the Fiery Rebirth skill. They also have this Lord Arkan skill, which shields them every time they use one of their items. So a lot of good stuff going on in this build. But where there is burn, there must be freeze. And I think this freeze build is maybe my favorite build on Pygmalien, as you've probably seen from my videos, and it might be the most powerful one out of them all. So what's our game plan? What are we doing to freeze? Well, first things first, we're going to try and get a Steam Ladle. We want to leverage the Steam Ladle early game while we find more freeze items. So we can use our Steam Ladle and whatever items that we have on board in conjunction with like one freeze item to try and bridge the gap. maybe upgrading our steam ladle so that it's getting a little bit bigger every time that freeze item is going off. But ultimately, you're probably not going to be getting a lot of freeze items on your board until the mid game. So you need to find a way to buy your steam ladle, keep it on board, and then have enough money essentially to be able to buy your freeze items in the mid game. The big items you're going to be looking for are Cold Room and Ice Club. Private Hot Springs is good too, as we talked about, but these two really make the build hum. These items are crazy powerful, and we'll get to them in a minute, but just know Cold Room, Ice Club, you really want these. We're also aggressively searching our shops for freeze items. We don't need to have the best economy in this build because we're not ultimately value stacking anything. We're not buying and selling a lot of stuff. We just want to make sure that when we go to a shop, that we have the right amount of money to be able to buy our freeze items. So economy is not the name of the game here, surprisingly, on the freeze build. It's really trying to aggressively search for the right items and just have just enough money to ensure that we are able to buy them. And then in that early game, in the mid game, we're going to want to boost our max HP. It's not necessary to go all in on this sort of synergy. We don't need to buy something like a lemonade stand. However, if we can get like a healthy hoarder, this will help us a lot. That skill we talked about earlier. We can buy some chocolates. This is going to help us out a lot. Again, we're not burning and putting on a ton of burn very quickly, but we are putting off burn pretty consistently, and we have a good amount of defenses to make up for that lack of offense. So having some max HP will certainly help us with that. And then late game, Ice Club and Private Hot Springs, if you can get this combination, you're pretty golden. Private Hot Springs says whenever you fall below half health, you're going to freeze all the items, and thus Ice Club is going to see all those charges. When it gets unfrozen, it's going to go off like crazy and probably destroy your opponent from there. Another big thing here is you're going to want to find icicles to enable all of these synergies. It's not something you want in the mid game. It's not even something you might want in the late game, but in the ultra late game, icicles are so insane. So here's an overview of these items. So here's the Giant Ice Club. It does a lot of damage and it gets charged every time that you shield. The Cold Room gets charged every time your opponent uses an item. So this thing is going to be going off like crazy and freezing many items. We've seen the Steam Ladle. The Stopwatch is very interesting. It freezes every item on the board, and thus it's going to create a lot of freeze triggers for something like your Steam Ladle or your Giant Ice Club. Additionally, utilizing like an Igloo, which is every time you freeze, you're going to gain shield. This can be pretty nice. And between all of like the properties and medium freezing items that we can get, the thing that we'd want to put next to a Cold Room is probably a Snow Globe. The other freeze items in the game are okay, but the Snow Globe itself has the potential to freeze 3 items every 7 seconds, which is just the most amount of freezing triggers that you can get from an item in that slot that aren't these other ones. And then Icicle here at the start of the fight is going to freeze something. Thus, when it goes off, it's really going to get everything charged up and going. But yeah, let's take a closer look. So love him or hate him, it's a Giant Ice Club. 12-second cooldown, deals 1,000 or 1,500 damage. That's a lot of damage. And says when any item gains freeze, any single item, it could be your items too, that's the big thing to note about this, it is going to get charged. So you could also get items that freeze your own items, which we definitely have access to. Not ideal, but we have access to it, and that'll freeze the Giant Ice Club. And it also says the first time you fall below half health each fight, you freeze one item for 99 seconds. This is an obscene text line. It doesn't need this, but it has this. If it had these other 3, it'd be still a top tier item, but it also can just shut off one item on your opponent's board completely when you reach half health, which is crazy to say the absolute least. But let's look at Ice Room. Cold Room. There you go. Cold Room. Cold Room. So this is a 10-second cooldown. And it says you freeze 1, 2, or 3 items for 1 second based off its tier. You also gain regeneration, which is pretty nice when you freeze. So this sees any instance of freeze it's going to give you regeneration. It doesn't necessarily need to be the Cold Room. And it also says when your enemy uses an item, charge this 1 second. So although it has a 10-second cooldown, A lot of builds are just these days that are not Pygmalion are putting a bunch of little items onto the board and spamming a bunch of stuff. We think about Dually Friends build, we think about Vanessa Weapons build, we think about a lot of like the potion builds from Mac. They're putting a lot of small items onto the board. Thus, this cold room is going to get charged like crazy. It's going to be freezing like crazy, and it's going to be creating a lot of freeze triggers, generally way more than any of the other freeze items that we have. Um, at least guaranteed, I would say. We can look at something that will create more freeze triggers that is a little more, I want to say ubiquitous. It freezes everyone's items, but this is the stopwatch. So, cooldown of 11 seconds, we're freezing both players' items for 1 or 2 seconds. Notably, you may not want to upgrade it if you have the opportunity. Freezing both players' items is fine, but you can get into the scenario in the late game where, well, you freeze everyone's items, and that includes something like your hot springs. Well, your opponent put all this poison and burn on you, so you're both doing nothing, but you are burning and being poisoned. So the clock is kind of working against you here. So it may not be always worthwhile to be actually freezing for 2 seconds. If you have burn and poison, I think that it makes sense to do. But if you don't, I would say that just get this at gold. You don't need to get it to diamond tier. But regardless, freezing every item and creating that many freeze triggers is pretty obscene. And here's the snow globe, which says cooldown 7 seconds. We freeze one item for 1 or 1.5 or 2 seconds and has +1 multicast for each adjacent property. We're probably going to have a decent amount of properties with this build, so the snow globe is going to work very well. We're definitely going to want to have a cold room, and we can find another property to put alongside this thing. Freezing an item for 2 seconds is also pretty crazy, so having 3 triggers of this at diamond tier is very good, but notably one big thing about this is we can get it super early from the Frost Street Challenger, which if we click on is going to be a day 3 fight. We can find these snow globe here. So just keep that in the back of your mind. Frost Street Challenger also has this icicles item that I think is very important to us. It says at the start of each fight, freeze an item for 3, 4, 5, or 6 seconds. Notably, if you're freezing an item for 4 seconds, even 3 seconds, that's a really long time in these fights. So this item is very good. It jumpstarts your board. And in the ultra late game, you want icicles. Icicles will win you the game 100%. Not 100% of the time, but they will certainly help you cross that threshold just because jumpstarting your build is very important and disrupting your opponent's build is very important. If you're getting to the point where basically each player, including yourself with the freeze build, needs like maybe 5 seconds to win the fight, well, icicles is going to make all the difference here. This is a very strong item. I would not underestimate it. Now we've looked at the Frost Street Challenger. Why don't we go ahead and look at some of the other monsters here? So one that I want to talk about here is the Gorgon Noble. Where are they? Let's search Gorgon Noble. So day 5, the Gorgon Noble. This one is very important to us because they have cooldown reduction, they have XP, but they have this petrifying gaze. First time you fall below half health, each fight freeze all enemy items for 1 second. So if we think about hot springs, the private hot springs, if we think about stopwatch, those are freezing all of our items too. Petrifying gaze is only one-sided. And if we can upgrade it through something like the Grand Master, we can freeze our opponent's board for 2 or 3 seconds. That's an insane amount of time to be freezing our opponent's board, but also a one-sided freeze is something that we don't have access to outside of this petrifying gaze unless we're doing it with our items. And getting on Pygmalion the ability to permanently freeze your opponents out is surprisingly not that easy given how many strong freeze items Pygmalion has, but a lot of them are very defensive and reactive instead of proactive. So generally, if you're perma-freezing your opponent's board or just freezing all of their items at one time, it's going to be through this petrifying gaze skill. Other than that, we can keep moving forward here to Chili Charles. They have an igloo. and they have an icicle, which are very nice for us. They can also have this crit chance skill, which means that whenever we freeze, we're getting crit chance, which is pretty nice. I also like Dr. Vortex. They have the weather machine, which freezes. It also burns and slows, which is nice. It's a property. It's also a vehicle, and there's some nice cooldown reduction items for vehicles in the game. They also have the Neophiliac skill, which I really think is the big get here. It says the first time you freeze, burn, slow, poison, and haste each fight, you charge one item for 2 or 3 seconds. So every time one of these is going off, you're going to be charging an item too. So if you freeze and burn, you're going to be charging one item for 4 seconds or 6 seconds. So this can be very good, especially if you have only a few of the freeze items or your board is maybe just like a couple big properties. This can be very good for getting your build up and running. Also, if we have the power to do it, Death Knight Reaper is a pretty difficult fight, but they have Sapphire, which is pretty insane. For us, that can mean that our our items are freezing +1 in their duration, so it works really well with like Private Hot Springs, which is freezing all the items besides itself, and thus we have even more buffer to be utilizing that item. Just in general, having plus freeze is very good. Also, Desperate Cleanse is a pretty nice one. Just as the first time you fall below half health each fight, you remove freeze and slow from your items and cleanse half your burn and poison. I can't remember how this works exactly with the Private Hot Springs. I think what happens is you use the Desperate Cleanse and then you would have had the Private Hot Springs trigger actually be affecting your board after that. So I don't think that it works in the way that you would want, where it instantly cleanses all of that freeze and slow. But this is still just a very potent skill to have, especially if you need a little bit of time for your hot springs to go off, or you just need a little bit of buffer for your freeze items to go off. So not a bad one to have here. And other than that, we should talk about these two monsters right here. Very different, very different feelings you should have towards them when you're in the freeze build, because one will kill you and one will not. Valkos Enforcer. Valkos Enforcer is going to kill you. If you are all in on your freeze, this character is they counter your build because of how Icebreaker reads, which says remove freeze from your items when it goes off, and when any item gains freeze, charge this 3 seconds, and when this item gains freeze, you remove it from it. So it can't be frozen, and you're going to be freezing your opponent's items. You're going to be freezing the Valkos Enforcer's items, and they're just going to be hitting you for 200 damage over and over and over and over again. That I will say, it's certainly you're able to beat them if you have a freeze build. It's not impossible to defeat the Valkos Enforcer, but if your freeze build is like okay, then the Valkos Enforcer is going to kill you. So just keep that in mind. That you need to have a really good freeze build before you face them. They also have the Diamond Tier Icicle. So if we're thinking about a freeze build that's really relying on something like a Giant Ice Club, well, they freeze your Giant Ice Club for 6 seconds at the start of the fight. Doesn't feel good. Things like that. But if you can defeat them, obviously getting any of these items is going to be very good for you. But just be careful. Be very careful. The other one here is Frost Street Champion. Frost Street Champion, if you have an Ice Club, it's not an auto win, but it's close to it. Basically, the big thing for that is that, again, the Ice Club checks all items that are frozen, including your own. So they're freezing your board a lot. And one big thing here is that at the start of the fight, they freeze all non-weapon items. So at the very least, they're freezing 1, 2, 3, 4 items on their board. That's 4 charges of freeze for your Giant Ice Club. So it's going off. And then if you have any other non-weapon items on your board, it's probably going to go off another time. They have 3,200 health. So you need your Giant Ice Club to go off 3 or 4 times, depending on its tier. It's pretty easy to do. And obviously they have a lot of great stuff for us. If you can get an Iceberg, that works out really well for you. Nitrogen Hammer. I think Nitrogen Hammer is maybe the best freeze item in the game. I'm willing to say it. If it's not the best, it's one of the best. It's like, it has to be at least top 3. Giant Ice Club might be just a little bit better, just because of how much damage it does. But the Nitrogen Hammer, just when you freeze, charge it. and it's gaining a bunch of damage whenever you freeze. Like this item can do obscene things. I have a video with Dooley that I'll link here that you'll see on the screen that you can watch me go crazy with this item. But yeah, you're going to want to take these fights if you can, but just keep in mind that the Volkus Enforcer, you need to have a better freeze build than they do, and they are likely to kill you just if you're freshly minted your freeze build. Well, let's look at this in practice. So here's a gold victory from user Go, and looks like they have shiny everything. That's pretty crazy. So they have the shiny cold room goes off twice, shiny igloo, shiny kiosk, and shiny giant ice club. One thing to keep in mind about this build that is illustrated very well here is yes, the 2x multicast on these items is very good, but you don't need really more than like an ice club and a cold room. If you get these 2 items, you're in a pretty good position to win a lot of the fights. The ice club does so much damage that having your cold room go off once or twice, and maybe even a third time for the fight, is going to be enough to defeat your opponents. And with all the builds that are using small items to go off very quickly, that means that these 2 items can solo a lot of your games. If you get an igloo, great. If you get a snow globe, great. If you get icicles, great. But really, it's these 2 items that are going to do the primary heavy lifting for you. And if you want to see another example of this and basically like how big and high rolly we can get with the freeze build, how insane they could be, I'll link this video I had of where I got this ice and freeze build when I was climbing earlier this month, I suppose it is. But I had my giant ice club, it was shiny. I had gotten the sapphire, so basically every time that this hot springs was going off, it was freezing every item for 4 seconds, and it was going off like crazy. But the big thing here is that I had gotten this freezing balcony, which said whenever you use the property to the left of this, it freezes. And then I had an icicle at the beginning of the fight, and I had lowered the cooldown through skills and through feathers. So basically what happened was at the beginning of the fight, the icicle goes off, which the hot spring sees, so the hot spring goes off, and then the balcony sees the hot spring go off, so then it goes off, and then I had an infinite loop of hot springs just freezing everything on the opponent's board, and then obviously the ice club sees it from there, and well, you can imagine what happened from there. It was a very powerful build that I'll link here. So yeah, freeze build. It's one of my favorites on Pygmalion, and I think additionally it might just be the most powerful build that Pygmalion has. Value stacking can be the craziest one, but out of the box, least amount of effort, freeze build is the way to go. And now for a build that is very different, it's the big drum. I imagine you know what happens next. We're gonna get the big drum. We want to get as many weapons from our shops early so that we can fill our board with weapons. We're looking for things like yo-yo, we're looking for things like lumbors and atlatl, these weapons that are going to scale very nicely, and then we're finding that drum. We're doing everything that we can to ensure that we're getting the Jabalian drum, and from there our build is going to go crazy. And here's this disclaimer. It's not going to be there for you every run, but when it is there, it is fully worth pivoting off of your build if you think your build is not that strong into a drum build. The drum is an obscene item, and it doesn't take a lot to make it very powerful. You can get a drum, and then you can fill your item with a bunch of, or fill your board rather, with a bunch of terrible items that are weapons, and you can still have decent success. It is just a very powerful all-in-one item here. But let's look at the specific items you want with it. So there it is in all its glory, the Jabalian drum. And as I talked about, getting something like a yo-yo, an atlatl are all very good with it. The lumbors as well is going to kind of help bridge the gap between you getting the drum and in the early and mid game. The lumbors are going to add damage to your board, which is pretty nice. The brass knuckles are also getting double damage from all of these different things. So your Jabalian drum says whenever you use a weapon, you're adding a static amount of damage to your board, and you're hasting that weapon. So basically, you're getting your weapons to go off like crazy, and you're adding a ton of damage to your board. It's pretty fun. It's a pretty fun like all in one item combo in some sense. But if you don't get the drum, what are you doing? Well, you can get again Lumbors, but you can also get a Pig's Gem. Pig's Gem will slot into this build very well, in addition to the drum or in replacement of the drum. So Pig's Gem, as we saw, it is going to give your weapons damage equal to its value, or 2 times its value, or 3 times its value, I believe, when you even get it to diamond. So if you can value stack a Pig's Gem, you can put it on a board with a yo-yo and Adlotl and a Brass Knuckles, and you're going to be doing a ton of damage when this thing goes off. I've definitely had some obscene builds where I've used a Pig's Gem. So your Jabalian Drum is your plan A is your drum, your plan B is a gem, your plan C is your Lumbors. And from there, you'll probably be winning those runs. So let's look at the drum. It says when you use a weapon, your weapons gain 5, 10, or 15 damage for the fight. And when you use a weapon, haste it for 1, 2, or 3 seconds. So obviously, if we can get our weapons to go off, we can get even something like a Fang to go off very quickly with our drum. It's going to be adding a lot of damage to our board. This is going to enable our Atlatl to have a lower and lower cooldown, and thus it's going off every 1 second, so every 1 second we're giving 15 or 10 more damage to our board. We put that next to the Atlatl next to a yo-yo, so every time the Atlatl goes off, the yo-yo is going off, so you're just creating a ton of damage stacking that way. And you're hasting those items as well, so they're going off super quickly. And if you can get an enchantment on the drum, it's going to go crazy. You can have a bunch of shielding, you can have even more hasting, you can do a bunch of healing. This one's pretty crazy. It's going to gain 10 crit chance for the fight when you use a weapon. Pretty trivial to do, especially if they're hasted. So you're going to generate a ton of crit very quickly. You can put burn, poison, slow, freeze. Honestly, the freeze one is crazy. I mean, when you use a weapon, freeze an item for 1 second, you probably have Jabalian Drum and then 7 other weapons on board that are going off, maybe every 2.5 to 1 second. That's nuts. So this item is very strong. And thus we can build around it. But what other items can work well with this? Well, as I talked about, having a Fang, 3-second cooldown item that's going to be dealing damage is pretty nice. We've talked about it plenty here, but the yo-yo is going to work well with that just because it gets charged so many times and it's going off so quickly and gaining damage, so it's going to do a lot of damage. Atlatl. There we go. There we go. Also, obviously, this gains a lot of damage, then it's going off quickly. That works really nicely. It might be a little counterintuitive, but we can put caltrops on the board. So even though the caltrops are not going off because of our weapons, we're still, because it is a weapon, putting damage onto it. So we're using all of our small weapons to go off very quickly. Thus the caltrops are getting bigger and bigger, and every time our opponent uses an item, we're hitting them with a progressively stacked caltrops. And then the last item here, this Lumbors. It says 7-second cooldown. You can get it at bronze, and it is certainly worth upgrading to silver, but it says it's going to deal 10 damage, but your weapons gain 5, 10, 15, or 20 damage for the fight. So this is obviously not better than the drum or the gem, but it does allow you to put damage onto your items that need to stack damage to be effective. Again, thinking about the Atlatl, thinking about the yo-yo, thinking about the Brass Knuckles, this Lumbors can be very effective. And because it is a 2-times multicast, if we're having it go off at gold, it's doing 30 more damage onto every single weapon, or 40 more damage onto every single weapon. So this is better than it looks. It also recently got buffed, so it is a real and viable item. Now, what skills do we want? Well, Rig and Rush. These are ones that'll kickstart the build. Basically, as we looked at before, the Rig skill says at the start of each fight, haste 2 items for a certain amount of seconds based on its tier, and Rush at the start of the fight will haste a weapon specifically for a certain amount of seconds based off its tier. These two jumpstart your build, and they ensure that you can start stacking damage onto your items as quickly as possible. Other than that, I mean, every damage skill is going to be good, whether that's left-handed, whether that's strength, whether that's lifting. Any damage skill is going to work well with this build. And I want to just skip looking in depth at the skills here and looking at the monsters and just jump straight to the build. I think it's pretty intuitive what monsters are going to work well for you. Um, Basically, anything that's going to have damage, anything that is going to have hasting, those are going to be what you want to see. But we can look at this build more so in action where we have our drum, again, we have our Lottle, and we have our yo-yo. We also have this flail here, so 3 times multicast item. Notably, this Atlatl has 208 damage on it, so it's already going off every second. And they also have cooldown reduction here, so it's going off very quickly. It's getting hasted, then the yo-yo goes off. These 2 items go off like crazy, makes your flail really big. You really don't even need the flail and the crook from this point, but you do have that option in this build, and I'm sure this was a very potent one at that. Now I want to look at a little bit of a crazier one here from this user, Kanadi, I think their name is. They have the crit chance drum, so every time their items are going off, they're getting plus 10 crit chance across the board. They have a freezing atomic clock, so this goes off every 1 second and increases the cooldown of an item and it's freezing an item. And then they have 2 yo-yos. So these are just seeing each other going off an obscene amount. And then these items don't really even matter from here. Honestly, just having 2 yo-yos is probably enough. But they also have an Uzi. They have the salts. The salts are going to double the damage of their board. This is just a crazy, crazy build. I would have loved to see this one in action. And the last, but certainly not least, build that I would like to talk about is the Beast of Burden. I lied. It is the least. It is the least. Basically, what we want to do here is with cargo shorts on board, we want to fill our backpack with as many unique item types as we can. We want to then find a Beast of Burden. The Beast of Burden is going to see our cargo shorts as having all these different item types, and thus it is going to gain a bunch of different iterations of multicasts. And then we're going to have a Beast of Burden that is going to be doing 10, 12, 13 multicast instances of damage. With this, we're also really aggressively, after we get that Beast of Burden, we're going to want to look for cooldown reduction, and we're going to want to look for damage stackers, something like a Ganjo, something like a Weights, but really we're going to want to look for an apropos chapeau, which we'll talk about in a second. And just as I kind of talked about and alluded to more so, don't be married to this build. This build is not as strong as it used to be. In a world where you're getting frozen and slowed so often in the late game, having an item that like Beast of Burden that is going off so slowly as your primary damage dealer and you not having a lot of survivability on board alongside it makes it very weak and vulnerable right now. This doesn't mean that you can't get a 10 win with the Beast of Burden, just means that you're much less likely to do so because of how all the other characters work in the game. So it is potent, but it's not nearly as potent as it used to be, and it is pretty weak compared to the other builds in the meta. But what is this build more specifically? So again, Beast of Burden, it's the name of the build, it's the item we want. We got all these other items to support it, and instead of talking about all these items, let me pull that up real quick. So you can see the Beast of Burden here, 10-second cooldown. I think I said 12 earlier, so 10 seconds. It's going to deal 50, 70, or 100 damage. And this has the types of items you have. So that's a pretty interesting keywords to have there, in that it has all these other keyword types. And the big thing here is it has +1 multicast for each of its types. So knowing all this in conjunction with cargo shorts, this says that this item has all the types of the items in your stash. So your cargo shorts are going to have all these different item types. Your Beast of Burden is then going to see the cargo shorts having those item types, and then the Beast of Burden itself will inherit those item types. So that's kind of the 1-2 combo right there. And then going back to kind of our item overview real quick, we want to pair this with like an apropos chapeau. We want to get cooldown reduction with a phonograph. The Dragon Tooth is also very important in that it is a dragon type item, and it adds damage to our Beast of Burden. And then this boomerang might look strange, but hear me out. If we are trying to aggressively hunt for different loot items that one give us the loot type, which is good for our cargo shorts, but two, they can give us cooldown reduction, they can give us damage as well. So if we get like a sharpening stone from our boomerang that is giving our beast of burden plus 15 damage, well, if it's a 10 times multicast beast of burden, we just put 150 damage on our beast of burden. So that is very strong in its own right. And generally with this build, we're going to have some space on our board for a boomerang. Really what we're looking for is the shorts, the apropos chapeau, and the beast of burden. So we have a slot for the boomerang. With that, you can also take it off for those fights against players, but this will gain you a lot of value, which is pretty nice. And if you're unfamiliar with the boomerang, it says when you win a fight against a monster with this, get a random loot item. And with this means that it has to be on the board when you fight the monster. You can't just have the boomerang in your backpack. It needs to be on the board so you get that random loot item. And the timing is a little weird on it. You're going to want to make sure that when you're going into the fight that you have one space allotted in your stash so that you can fill that item with the loot item when you win, because it's going to be automatically generated. It's not something that you select as basically like your reward during that fight. It's going to be automatically generated and put into your stash. So you're going to need that space for it ahead of time. And then taking a glance at the apropos chapeau. So with this item, the big thing about it is that our cargo shorts and our beast of burden are going to have all these types. So it's pretty easy to have +5 multicast on this thing. And thus also putting more damage onto our beast of burden and then putting more heal and shielding onto our cargo shorts. All of these are going to be pretty good. So this just synergizes super well with those other two items and is not an auto include. It's not something that you need, but it will help take your build over the top. The problem again is that you're pretty vulnerable. You're so all in on your beast of burden that you may just die before it goes off if it gets frozen or slowed. But when it does go off, it's going to do a crazy amount of damage, as we saw. Okay, and a quick content warning. If you don't like rats, you're going to want to look away in like 3, 2, 1. I think they're pretty cute though. Anyway, the skills that we want. We want damage skills. Any damage skill that we can put on our beast of burden is going to be very effective for us for obvious reasons. We have a 10 times multicast item. All of those damage skills are going to work very effectively with that. Also notably, if our beast of burden has all these different types, it's probably going to have the property type. And thus we can look for cooldown reduction skills that are of the property type, or that are giving our properties more cooldown reduction, and our beast of burden is a property. That also works with something like reinforced steel, which says when you use a property, you're going to give your items more damage and more shielding. And thus, it's going to also see that every time the beast of burden goes off. So if it goes off 10 times, that's 10 iterations of reinforced steel happening. Additionally, it works the same with commercial zoning, which says when you use a property, deal damage equal to 1 or 2 times your gold. So the interesting thing about a beast of burden build too is that your backpack's going to get full a lot and you're looking for very specific items. So you're generally building up a bank of money in alongside it. So your commercial zoning is going to do a pretty good amount of damage. And again, 10 times multicast item, 12 times multicast item, you have 50 gold. Well, you just did, what is that, 600 damage? Yeah, on top of it. So nice little addition there. But looking at those other skills, we can again look at something like Industrialist, which is reduce the cooldown of your properties by 10 or 15%. So again, our beast of burden is going to probably be a property if we have one in the backpack. And the same with our cargo shorts. So that works very well. One thing that you're also going to want to know about the cargo shorts is that let's go to the items here, it can inherit rather the weapon property, or the weapon type, I should say. So if you have a item that cares about like left-handed or right-handed, it cares about where an item is positioned to receive the buff. So we can look at left-handed here, which says your leftmost weapon deals 40, 50, 30, 20 damage. Your cargo shorts could be eating that buff and not doing anything with it and be taking that buff away from your Beast of Burden. So you just have to be careful where you position that on your board. And here's an example of when I have done this in the past. Now, this is actually one of the videos that I recorded over a month ago, but I'll link it here so that you all can see where we're using that Beast of Burden again next to the apropos chapeau. We're also utilizing the cargo shorts to create that synergy. And then we have thrusters to reduce the cooldown. We can even see that the thrusters here were pre-patched, so this was just reducing the cooldown and burning both players. And then we had a cold room here as well, just to put some freezing onto the board. And we were utilizing things like heavy firepower to put more damage on our Beast of Burden. We had big numbers, so it was critting. We had even more damage, more crit. We were charging our freezing cold room. So this Beast of Burden, it is potent. This was a different patch, realistically. So things have changed. This was before Mac, but you can see that this was an 8-win build. Wasn't even a 10-win at the time. So it can, get you into that late game. But in my goal in the Bazaar, I always want to get 10 wins. That's my goal every time I go into a run. How can I get to 10 wins? So whatever I need to do to get there is what I'm going to do. And the Beast of Burden generally falls short of that. If your goal is not to get to 10 wins every single run, the Beast of Burden, you're going to love it. It's a super fun puzzle to try and figure out what items you want in your stash and what items that you're willing to buy and sell and what items have certain types and what you can get from Pearl's dig site. I think Beast of Burden is just one of the more fun builds that you can do because it does have this little sub game to it where you're also trying to manage your inventory alongside it. I really enjoy it personally. So I like the build. I just want to recognize that it's not the strongest one in the meta right now. However, I would say if it is offered to you in a run and you're in the mid game, take it. It's going to win you day 4 through 8 or 4 through 9 pretty well. And then you're going to probably have to figure out how to supercharge it or make it do something crazy past that. But I think it is still potent in the mid game and even into some portions of the late game. But yeah, this is one that I really enjoy. And we got 8 builds, but I have to give you a 9th. I have to give you the wonderful, honorable mention to bees. If you don't know this build, then welcome. Here's our game plan. We buy this. We buy the beehive. We buy the beehive, we get the bees. You see, we buy the bees, we get the bees. We buy properties. We buy the properties, we get the bees. We buy the properties, we get more bees. You got 7 bees here. That's a lot of bees, man. That's a lot of bees. And that's all you need to do. You buy the bees, you get the bees. We're all proud of you. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. You did a great job. I'm very happy for you. Okay, but what is the beehive? So, when your enemy uses an item or uses a weapon, rather, you charge your busy bees. And when you buy a property, you get a busy bee. And your bees get more damage. So, let's look at a busy bee. Busy bee. 7-second cooldown, does damage. That's it. The whole thing. You put the beehive on the board. You fill the board with bees. That's what you do. That's the whole build. You buy as many properties as you can. You get as many damage buffs as you can. And then you just hope. You hope and pray that your enemy has weapons. If they don't have weapons, your build does very little. But if they have weapons, and I will say Vanessa weapons builds are very popular right now, the beehive is going to be pretty good. You can still just get killed anyway, but this is still one of the builds of all time that is available to you. I'm not going to say it's bad. I'm not going to say it's good. I'm just going to say that it is a build that you can run. I want to acknowledge it. Use that information how you will. Here is demonstrated the bees. That's a big bee. Maybe that's the queen bee. Here's all the other bees. They got the beehive. They got crit chance, a lot of crit chance. Wow. They got skills to make their bees go off more. They got damage. They have, whenever they buy a property, they're getting max health. They got bees, man. They got some bees, and these bees will hit you. Hitting you for 700, that's a lot of damage, man. That's a lot of damage. Okay, I'm just saying, the bees, man. But anyway, this has been 8 builds for Pygmalion, and generally I would say these are like the core builds of Pygmalion. They're the ones that you're going to want to look for in your runs. You're going to want to know that they exist. You're going to be able, hopefully now, to pivot between them. I know pivoting is very difficult in this game. I'll put out some more content on how to do that and how to identify when to do that. But with this knowledge, my hope is that you'll be able to have a better understanding of how you should be utilizing each of your different shops, and basically what you understanding better what you were trying to build into. So I'll put timestamps as well so that you can reference this and come back to it. You can see, hopefully on the fly, what you should be looking for with each build and start to see which items are overlapping and then potentially when to pivot or what to pivot into with each of these builds. And just to address some, I don't know, not questions, not concerns, but maybe just ideas that are out in the bazaar right now. I've seen this talked about a lot, which is that purely defensive builds are very difficult to pull off. I've seen people say that they're outright impossible. I think that's not true completely, but I think it is very difficult. The builds on Pygmalion especially, you can do some really crazy defensive things, but I think in the current patch and era, you need to have some sort of proactive threat that's going to end the game. So if you're just trying to be defensive and hoping to survive your opponents out, you can maybe do that up until like day 7, maybe day 6, but a lot of the builds in the bazaar are stacking a lot of burn, a lot of poison, a lot of damage, and they're also stacking their stats. So we can think about Shark Claws, which is adding more and more damage to the board, or Orange Julian, which is adding more and more damage to the board. We're thinking about poison builds from Mac that are putting on tremendous amounts of poison onto you over and over and over again. We can think about Dooley, who's going to be doing a ton of burn damage to you and stacking up the numbers really, really high. It's just very difficult right now to do defensive builds, and I think that is why Pygmalion inherently is a little weaker than all the other characters at face value. I think all the characters are viable, I'll say this much. And I think in every single patch, one of the fun things is to identify what is powerful and what isn't powerful. I see a lot of discourse around people who say, like, this is broken, that's broken, they need to fix this. Well, do they need to fix it, or did players figure out what was powerful in that patch? I think there's always going to be something that was inherently powerful. Mind you, I think that there are some things that inherently push all other builds out of the meta, like I think the Dooley Bugs build needed to be nerfed and maybe even needs to be nerfed even more. But generally speaking, I think that from what I see from this game and what I believe, don't quote me on this being the facts from Tempo themselves, but how I'm perceiving it is that when they're putting out these patches, there's an understanding that some things are going to be more powerful than others, and thus it is on the players to recognize what those are and what those aren't. And from there, we can figure out what builds to have. In this patch, we figured out defensive builds are not the way to go. On Pygmalion, you need to have proactive threats, and that's why you can see something like a drum build excelling, or even like a freeze build excelling, or a burn build excelling. There's many viable options for Pygmalion. It's just harder to pull off because one of the, I don't want to say main, but one of the big appeals of Pygmalion was all the defensive items that he has, and those are just simply not effective without some proactive action that you are taking to try and do damage to your opponent. Another thing here is that Pig just has a lot of bad items that are bad because they don't do anything on their face. Like, you can think about jewelry, which says that it has a damage, or it shields on a 4-second cooldown equal to its value. This item shields for 1 inherently at a bronze tier. You could value stack that item, but you don't really want to do that. I mean, you could, I guess you could. You very easily could, but you would have to put so many resources into this item to make it good that it just doesn't simply feel worth it. And why stack your jewelry when you could be stacking your fixer-upper that's inherently going to be doing more shielding, and it's going to be inherently upgrading itself. So just thinking about items like that, there's a lot of little items on Pygmalion that just, it's not that they're unplayable, it's that you got to find the right build for them. And even when you do, they're probably not doing the thing that they say on their face is the most power, that they say on their face is going to be what they want you to do with it. I think about, again, like jewelry. I even think about bandages. Bandages in its own right, not a very good item. It's at bronze, it's healing for 5, it's shielding you for 5. But if you can find a way to put like a Ganjo aside it, and so you're stacking these stats on it, that's where it can become very good. Another big thing to know about Pygmalion, economy is everything, generally. As we saw, not every build needs economy, but so many builds want you to value stack. They want you to buy a lot of weapons. They want you to buy a lot of non-weapons. They want to buy a lot of stuff, sell a lot of stuff. You're going to do better on Pygmalion if you have the money to buy things. It's not like other heroes that can kind of purely rely on the raw power of the items that they find in their shops. Pygmalion has a lot of bad items that you find in your shops that you have to figure out how to leverage, or you're buying purely to sell them. We can think about something like the pinata, which you can buy and you're going to sell it. You're going to gain 3 chocolates, and you bought it for 8. You sold the chocolates for 0. You sold the pinata for 0. You got no money back, and you just invested 8 gold to get 30 life. Things like this. Or I guess that'd be 60 life, regardless. Things like this, you need to know how to utilize your buying and selling on Pig to leverage those items that look like they do nothing in the shops. And generally speaking, you are going to have to buy a lot of do nothing items to make your items even better, and you're going to need money to do that. The fourth thing I'll mention here, if you're going to play Pygmalion, backpack management is key. If you are uncomfortable managing your stash, then you're going to have a hard time on Pygmalion. There's going to be a lot of times when you're trying to figure out, okay, I have, let's say, a boomerang on board. I also know I have a pitchfork, and I also have maybe something like a cash register, which say that I'm going to get 2 gold or 2 silver coins at the start of the day, and I'm going to be getting these truffles at the start of the day. I need to make sure that I end my run in a fashion that I have 4 slots available, but I also need to be making space so that I'm buying and selling and not forgetting the fact that I have the boomerang on board, which is generating another item for me that I forgot about and then I missed my value. You're going to want to be cognizant of your backpack and managing that space. It is pretty core to Pig's gameplay, especially if you're going for like a value stacking build, utilizing something like a ledger. There's a lot of really important items that just stay in Pig's backpack for the entire game. So keep that in mind. It's not always intuitive, but I think it's pretty fun when you get the hang of it. It's kind of like having 2 boards to manage. It may sound daunting when you put it like that, but I think that you're going to get the hang of it pretty quickly once you start practicing it. And hey, practicing is playing here, so it's all upside. And this leads me to my final point. Pig can be strong. You gotta spend money to make money. That's why economy is so important. You're going to spend your money. You're going to get your economy item. You're going to make even more money off getting that thing. You're going to want to buy your piggy bank. You're going to want to buy your crystal bonsai. You're going to want to sell them. You want to gain as much money as you can from them. Pig can make the most money in the game out of any of the other characters, and you can utilize that money to win it. But all this said, this has again been 8 plus 1 honorable mention builds on Pygmalion. I've really appreciated you all joining me here. I am the Bazaar Whisperer. This is the Bazaar Over-Explain videos where I go in depth on different strategies and different characters in the game. If you have made it this far, well, hey, you could like, you could subscribe. Ultimately, whatever you do, I just appreciate that you are here with me on this journey, and I will see you in the next video.